This is Nifty Culture. I'm Pio, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with very talented actor and artist, David Bianchi. How's it going, David?
Hey, man. What's up, man? Happy to be here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic, man. Living the dream one day at a time. That's often what I say. You know, I try to walk in a perpetual state of gratitude and just focus on what's right in front of me, you know, and I feel very lucky that I get to participate in the things that I get to participate in and that I get to talk about what I get to talk about. And yeah, just trying to live what I think is my best life.
Well, I can tell from talking to you, I can tell from, the NFT drop that we're going to talk about and the rest of your work that I've checked out, that you're super, super driven. And, that's awesome. I'm excited to kind of, dig into your career a little bit. Can you give people some context on, your career, your creative background and kind of a little bit about who you are?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks again for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is David Bianchi. I'm widely known as an actor, independent filmmaker, but also a spoken word poet. And so for the better of 16 years, I've been producing experimental short films that are socially conscious, that are told entirely in spoken word poetry. And over the course of the years, I've developed an art form that I call spinema, which I've trademarked. And spinema meaning spinning cinema through spoken word. So essentially what it is these are essentially cinematic experiences that are told entirely in poetry, each that have socially conscious undertones. And so that sort of was my entry, and actually was my entry into the NFT space. In film and TV, I'm currently recurring on a show called SEAL Team, as well as Queen of the South, season 4. And I am the founder of a production company called Exertion Films. So everything that you'll see of me that is produced comes out of my production company. Either I am producing or I am directing, or I have other people that are in my team that are directing as well.
Awesome. And so, you have this NFT drop that we're in the throes of. You're releasing it like week by week, new pieces, all one of ones. I think it's definitely a very, strong model for releasing work like this and, giving the work the kind of scarcity that it deserves. How did you find out about NFT technology? What kind of drew you to it? And what were your beginnings with NFTs?
Sure. Great question. I've been involved in investing in cryptocurrency since late 2017. So by the grace of that, understanding the technology, taking the leap from blockchain to non-fungibles and then understanding how the blockchain systems work was not a very difficult leap for me. So I wasn't coming out dry per se. So I had basically heard about the boom of it probably late 2020, kind of when everybody else did. I think I was following Beeple Crap for 2 years on Instagram. And I remember once upon a time, like he was selling one of his everydays, and he was asking like $2,500 for it. And I collect physical art. In fact, if you look behind me, like that one that's white and purple, that's one of my originals. And, I collect, physical art. So I was like, oh, do I want to buy this thing? I'm like, it's kind of weird, like digital art, like 20. And I passed $2,500 I got out of people. If I only knew then, right? So, but as it happened, I got really, really interested in this idea of proprietorship, of authenticity, of basically the biggest renaissance in art history, which is passive income for the artist. And I just said, wow, this is fascinating, because myself, I'm an artist first. Right? I make money as an actor and as an independent filmmaker, but I'm an artist first. I got a congratulatory letter from Mayor Villaraigosa for my artistic endeavors in North Hollywood for doing gallery exhibits. And I've done physical gallery exhibits with my abstract contemporaries. And, being a writer, screenwriter, poet, film producer, film director. So I'm multidisciplinary. And so that's why Spinema became what it was, because it's an amalgamation of all of the art forms that are David Bianchi, being an actor, being a poet, and being a filmmaker. And so I'm in a very unique intersection to be able to deliver this kind of art to the world. And for anybody that's out there, I've scoured the internet. There's nobody in the entire internet space that is producing poetic films to the cinematic degree that I am, where we're using anamorphic lenses, where we're using, A and B cameras, sometimes 15, 20 person crews, original scores, sound design, full on like Da Vinci color correction. Like I treat these things like theatrical grade films. And so to get to your question, when I started discovering the NFT space, I just didn't know how I wanted to penetrate the market. I was like, how do I want to be identified as an artist? Because everything that I was exploring was like, okay, 50 megabytes here, 50 megabytes here. And I'm not a 2D or 3D render artist. Being a poetic sort of filmmaker, I've always wanted to bring Spinema to a wider audience. In fact, for many years, I've been attempting to develop a television series around Spinema, which almost got set up, but then it fell apart. So at any rate, I ended up shopping around. I found a platform called Ephemera, and that's Ephimera. And Ephemera is an NFT platform that is primarily lens-based. So they focus on things that are captured through lens, not things that are captured or created on a screen. And they allowed for 250 megabytes on the mint. And then as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, this is the holy grail for me. Let me see what I can do if I could sort of like reverse engineer something and get an entire film to fit that capacity, because my Spinema films are oftentimes no longer than 9 minutes, right? So I basically kind of cracked the code. I took a 1080 file, I crunched it down to 960 by 540, and I toggled the bit rate, and I was able to get it down to 250. And so what people were able to do was they were able to watch the entire film from first frame to last frame without any lossless image and not tied to an IPFS. So in other words, as a collector, you're able to watch an entire film from front to back. And so I entered the space as the first person to ever mint an award-winning spoken word film as an NFT that was socially conscious. And that project was called I Can't Breathe. And it was a soliloquy of the pain that I was experiencing during the largest civil rights movement in global history, post the death of Mr. George Floyd. And so that project ended up successfully auctioning to Metapurse. And in an unprecedented move, I made the decision to donate 100% of those purchase proceeds to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. And so now working with the George Floyd Memorial Foundation to establish digital wallets. But what was also very important to me is bringing cryptocurrency into the inner cities of Minneapolis, right? To make sure that once my work is long gone, that crypto is remaining there, and that the George Floyd Memorial Foundation can now receive cryptocurrency, and that they can then start to have conversations about the value of crypto, and then expanding the consciousness of it to inner city people of color and minority groups. Because oftentimes as minorities, we're the last people to the table as it relates to technology and finance. So my mission is very big as it relates to NFTs, and everything that I do in the NFT space is socially conscious and has a philanthropic leg to it. I've made the commitment that every single project that I mint, I will donate a portion of that equity to charity that is attached to the topic of the specific drop. So that's kind of the short version, if there is one.
I mean, that's the awesome version is what it is. So I knew about, the George Floyd project, and I knew that you donated the proceeds, but I didn't know about the education surrounding cryptocurrency and allowing putting the foundation in a position to receive donations or to hold cryptocurrency and the benefits of that, trying to educate the community on it, because that's something that I'm really big on. Is I'm kind of late to the dance, even though everybody's still early. I started buying in March 2020, which is still, earlier than a lot of people. But, I feel like the education surrounding it is just so important. And really a lot of the issues that people in urban environments, people in the inner cities are facing, they stem from money. And the idea is that if you can fix the money or at least improve it, right, then improvements can be made. What was the response? I know you mentioned it was award winning. What was the feedback after you released the project on this new NFT technology, such a big, powerful project?
Yeah, so the project in and of itself broadcast on KTLA's Emmy-nominated series Breaking Bias. They saw the film, and they did a resurgence of the series to show the film, and so it had got a lot of critical acclaim, etc. But when I brought it to the blockchain, to be quite honest, I didn't know anybody in the NFT space. I literally was like, I'm just going to do this, and the first thing I knew was Clubhouse. So I went into Clubhouse and just started joining Clubhouse rooms, and I started like following NFT platforms all over Twitter. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm literally like blind, touching the walls and just going as I go. But I think that through God's work, preparedness, really good art, and presenting something that's sophisticated, that really attacked the human condition and was relevant in a way, because at the time this was just leading up to the trial was sort of ongoing, and the verdict was about to happen. And so as a result of that, I think I landed in the hands of some really influential people in the Clubhouse space. And those gentlemen really, really lifted me up. They said, wow, what you're doing is incredible. We want to help support you. How can we support you? And those are people like Paulo Moreno, people like Farouk, people like, Wolf Lion, like some really heavy hitting influential people in the Clubhouse space. And if it weren't for Clubhouse, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you. Because in the beginning, that's all that I knew of the NFT space, and everything that I learned about NFTs fundamentally came from YouTube and Clubhouse, and NFTs.tips and these great rooms where I found such a rich and such a generous community in the NFT space. And for me, working in Hollywood, it's incredibly unusual that people are just so open and generous with information, and open and generous with their time and contacts and things. Very unusual, and I think that says a lot about how powerful the NFT space is, but almost how much we're all sort of proud of it, right? So I almost feel like I have a specific responsibility to offer the same olive branches to people that come to me and ask me for favors and ask me for help. And so I just give it away freely as it was given away to me. And the NFT community is like nothing I've ever experienced. I mean, even look at the Bored Apes. I mean, it's crazy, man. You own an ape. Oof, let's get it in. I mean, it's, I had to buy an ape. And I got an ape, and I've got a bunch of really cool collectibles. And I know that with this work that I'm doing, there is no ceiling as it relates to non-fungibles. Not just no ceiling in terms of the amount of creativity that I can exude, but also as it relates to the amount of social consciousness and awareness that we can put out into the ecosystem. What I find really important, including people like yourself in the NFT community, is that most of the NFT community is college educated, technologically driven and tech savvy, sophisticated, and has a hunger for highbrow art, and also influential. You put all those things in one pile and connect these people en masse, there's no limit to what can be done. And I Can't Breathe, and then my second drop is pure evidence of the census of the NFT community, because the amount of influence and the amount of care, the amount of intellect that the NFT community has is the reason why I've been so successful. Because they've seen the value of the art that I'm creating, and they've really wrapped their arms around it.
Yeah, and I think that what you said about, for example, Hollywood being a little bit more guarded with information, almost kind of having a scarcity mentality when it comes to sharing information, sharing skill sets or pro tips, so to speak. You just don't run into that in the NFT community. Like you said, people are much more generous with their time, generous with information. Obviously, not to say that no one in Hollywood is like that, but in NFTs, damn near everybody kind of is pretty generous. So I'm glad that you got onboarded. I'm not surprised that Clubhouse was your onboarding, because it's pretty easy to connect with people when you're actually speaking with them verbally, right? And so I think that that's like kind of a smooth way for people to get in that are on the outside.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also, being that my art form is poetic, I was able to perform, some of these poems in those rooms, and really move people in a very, very bold way, but in a very honest way. I don't take the work that I do lightly, and I don't take the responsibility of what I have taken on lightly, because it's almost like when you become a public figure, you have an invisible contract with your audience, right? And when you're a person of color and you talk about racism, and you talk about, injustice against people of color, when you talk about, things like the Minstrel show, when you talk about, overpopulated prisons, when you talk about abductions at the Mexican border, or whatever it is that I'm choosing to talk about, I have a specific responsibility to comport myself properly, and to have a fluid and focused and distinct vision, and make sure that my heart is always in the right place. And I'm human. And so sometimes, my brain keeps me awake at night, because just like anybody else and every other artist, there's days where you feel very good about what you're doing, and there's days where you feel very insecure about what you're doing, and as it should be. And so I do take the weight of this very, very seriously. And anyone that knows me intimately knows that to be true.
Yeah, and I think it's also very apparent in the work. Like, I'm hoping that people that watch this interview will take the time to pop onto Super Rare, and we'll make sure to link to it in the description so that everybody can take a look at the drop and see, this Spinema, right? The spoken word films that David's putting out, because I think it'll be very apparent to anybody that watches just how serious you take the work. And I mean, I can imagine how powerful it must have been for the people that didn't know what they were getting into in the clubhouses, and then all of a sudden you're performing these poems. They must have been like, oh wow, like this is for real right now, So I think it's a good transition for us to start talking about the project. So it's been dropping on Super Rare every week. It's called Unlocking the Modern Day Minstrel. We're going to show some of the work, but yeah, what can you tell us, about the project?
Sure. It's called the Modern Day Minstrel. It's a photo series that I conceptualized from pencil sketches and produced with an incredible photographer named Isaac Alvarez. And so we produced it here in Los Angeles, and the idea is creating an oxymoronic portrait series of myself, a person of Afro descent, painted in blackface, right? To not only raise awareness about the history of the minstrel show, but to also raise awareness about the lack of equality that there are for people of color in film and television today. So why does film and television matter, and why is it personal to me? Well, simply because if we go back to about 1820 or so, that was theoretically recorded the first ever minstrel show, where you had white people painting themselves in blackface, making horrible fun and racist fun of black people, everything from dancing to jokes to buffoonery, making black people seem like criminal, making them seem sexually hungry, making them seem tomfoolish. And so what's crazy about this is that it ended up being the largest theater movement in American history. So let me just say that again. The minstrel show, white people painted in blackface, was the largest theater movement in American history. It became the national art form. It overtook opera, eventually became vaudeville, eventually became Broadway, which eventually, what happened when film hit the scene? Film modeled itself off what they knew best, which was Broadway and vaudeville. So then blackface and minstrelsy started to penetrate silent films. And then you have movies like Birth of a Nation, for example. And then eventually in talking films. I mean, even Audrey Hepburn danced and painted herself in blackface. Al Jolson's Jazz Singer, one of the most famous studio films where a white man was painted in blackface. So this was a national art form. I mean, even into the 1980s, the BBC was actually showing television syndicated programming into the 80s on the BBC in the UK in blackface. And so we have to ask ourselves, and part of this is education, so that you understand the roots of blackface, so that my Caucasian counterparts and other people that don't know the racist history of this can see it and start to understand the Afro trauma. Because even today in Europe, in Netherlands, and in France, and also in parts of Belgium, they even have annual celebrations called Zwarte Piet, which is a blackface celebration where hundreds of thousands of white people revel in the streets and party painted in blackface. So this is a racist thing that's happening now. And so if you look at the series not only addresses the history of the minstrel show and uncovers the history of the minstrel show and uncovers the notions of racism, it also uncovers the notions of stereotypes against people of the Afro diaspora in America. If you look at the white subservient gloves, those are the white subservient gloves that were worn by the house Negro during the slave days. The watermelon was used as a stereotypical device against black people. In the slave fields, many slaves would grow watermelon, but we weren't able to eat it. We weren't able to take them home. And because black folks were so starved and so dehydrated in the fields, when the slave owners would allow black folks to have a watermelon, you would eat it like a ravaged animal. And so as a result of that, you could actually search black people and watermelon, and you will see all kinds of racist, vicious paraphernalia and all kinds of propaganda that existed from the 1800s all the way up into literally almost into the late 60s, early 70s in some areas of the South. And so it's also about facing these stereotypes. And through the series of this minstrel show, you see how the images unfold. He begins to lose himself. In the beginning, he wants to work for equality. The first one that just dropped, it's called Work for Equality. And then moving forward, eventually he starts to lose himself. So you see that first image, that's the first one that dropped on Super Rare called Will Work for Equality. And beneath each NFT, you hear custom spoken word poetry that is in my voice, telling the story of the minstrel in the place that he is actually in, right? And so it's very, very visceral and very, very powerful and very, very confrontational stuff. And the second one was obviously possession. And the idea is that as we evolve as Afro people, We reject these stereotypes, but generational trauma has burned them into us. And so oftentimes it's very hard to release what subconsciously we don't know exists, right? And so every race, every culture has stereotypes that are perpetuated against them. Whether you're Jewish, whether you're Italian, whether you're Black, whether you're indigenous, these just happen to be some of the stereotypes that are vicious and racist against people of the Afro diaspora. And so to close this conversation, at least this discussion, at least at this point, what's important about the Minstrel Show is that if you look at the Screen Actors Guild today, and why is it personal to me? Because I am an actor, is the Screen Actors Guild reports that it is 73% Caucasian, 73, 13% African American, 4% Latino, 4% Pacific Islander or other, and then there's a couple other percentage points of other races and ethnicities. This is all a result of historical grandfathering going all the way back to the Minstrel Show, and why there is a lack of equality in film, media, music, and television for people of color.
Absolutely. And you know, you using the term visceral, I think is very accurate. It was the term that I was going to use on how I felt when I first watched the work, you know, definitely the spoken word, but even the images. And I only briefly held some of those reference images on screen. I know it is important to show them, but I do think that they give you a really visceral reaction. So I just didn't want to upset anyone and keep our viewers watching, but I do think it is important to show them so that you can really understand the roots of this, like you pointed out. On the subject of Hollywood and the, you know, the very like obvious favoritism that Caucasians have gotten and continue to get in Hollywood, do you feel that any like what sort of progress do you think has been made in the past couple of years? Because like for me as an outsider, I feel like there's at least now a little awareness and a little bit of an effort to, at award shows, to recognize, you know, Black and other, you know, non-white actors. But I'd love to hear from you as someone on the inside, like what kind of progress do you think has been made there?
Oh, I think that, and it's a good point to talk about. And, you know, before we do that, I'll get to that question. I'm going to read one of the poems from the first one.
Absolutely.
And this is from Equality. Since 1820, white men painted themselves in blackface, making a mockery of the Black story. Starting the Minstrel Show glory, the largest theater movement in American his story. Does this lynching rope make you uneasy? The white servant gloves that my massa gave me, the big red lips that your granddaddy painted on me. My skin is bare with the oppression as my identity. So I have no choice but to work for equality. Welcome to the Minstrel Show. And so when you see the NFT and you hear it with the score and the sound design and you experience it in its full breath, you really get a sense of the world, of the pain, of the struggle that is actually being conveyed in the imagery. As it relates to your question, there have been a lot of great leaps and bounds in Hollywood. Quite a few really, really good ones in the last 5 to 10 years, you know, with AMPAS, for example, the American Movie and Motion Pictures Association of America. They vote for the Academy Awards. They've opened it up to women and people of color. So that has become a little bit more homogenous, but still nowhere near where it needs to be. The category Latinx is a big thing in Hollywood. Being ethnically ambiguous is a big thing in Hollywood. Because when I moved to Hollywood 17 years ago, I didn't have a pot to piss in. I slept on an air mattress. I had cockroaches in the kitchen, you know, and I used to bunch up my clothes. Hey, shout out Blockchain Queen. And I used to bunch up my clothes in a ball, and I'd put on 3 shirts, and I'd sleep like this on an air mattress on the floor in Silver Lake. Because for many years, I wasn't castable. Because I wasn't Black enough, but I wasn't Latino enough, or I wasn't white enough. And I'd say, well, wait a second. If this were 1840, would I be a slave? It's a pretty simple question. Okay, good. So now we're past that. Was I called a nigger in 2nd grade by my principal? Yes, I was. Was I told that I had to shit in the woods because I couldn't use the bathroom because I'm not white? Yes, I was. Were members of my family made to use leaves to wipe themselves in the woods? Yes, they were. Was I told that I can't date this girl because I'm not white? Yes, I was. Nigger, get out of my house. Yes, I was. So anybody that comes to me and tries to put a soapbox in front of themselves and say that, who am I to say these things? Well, everybody's going through a war that they know nothing about. And it's important that I qualify and identify with the struggle of what it means to be a person of color, because there is not a person of color in the modern first world that has not in some way, shape, or form experienced racism. And that's just a fact. And I know I diverted from your question, but the final answer to that is that, yes, there have been some great advances. And I think that it's moving in the right direction. Black film didn't really explode until, well, I think it was like late early 70s with a movie called Sweet Sweet's Badass Song, which was directed by Melvin Van Peebles. That actually was the sort of dawn of the blaxploitation movement. And more opportunities are being made available to people of color. And there's a lot of great production companies that are doing great things, Macro Entertainment, for example. So for me, this is just about raising awareness, about answering the why. Because one of the things that I discovered during the civil rights movement is I would speak to people that weren't of color. And one of the questions would be like, why are y'all so mad? Like, you didn't know George Floyd. You didn't know Ahmaud Arbery. You didn't know some of these martyrs. And so the Minstrel show is part of the why. Me having to take a shit in the woods because I was literally told I couldn't go in the house by a bunch of white kids and be called Jungle Book when I was a kid. That's part of the why, right? And so this sort of like systemic racism that transcends generations is part of the why. And so for me, this is really important to not only bring up the why, but also have a conversation about it that's open and that's adult, but that's confrontational, so that we can learn to heal. Because white folks can't solve their problems with black folks just amongst white folks. And black folks can't solve their problems with white folks just amongst black folks. we have to communicate, right? And so I think that, and I hope that the Minstrel show is opening up the opportunity for those types of discussions so that we can really start to understand. And the more that we understand, the more we can heal and the more that we can move on. And that's important to me.
Yeah. And I obviously there's a lot to kind of discuss and unpack. I think that the way that you go about it with those really powerful and like very technically sound poems and the way that you kind of deliver it with that image on screen, I just think that it's a little bit of an awakening for people, when they see it. Like I mentioned before, you get a visceral reaction. I wonder, like, as long as people kind of understand that this isn't like make believe, this is representing real life historical, images or real life historical things that were just normal at that time, right? Like you talked about, it was just totally normal for white actors to wear blackface and to represent black people in the way that they did. So I think that shouldn't be overlooked. And that's the way I kind of look at the project. You've been releasing one NFT a week. Can you talk about that drop structure, what the idea was there and how things have been going so far?
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, it's and thank you for asking. So Super Rare, an incredible platform, an incredible, one of the what I consider one of the few white glove platforms in the NFT space. I applaud them because it's one thing for me, a person of color. Look, I've taken a lot of flack from the Black community about what I'm doing, and no great artist is without controversy as far as I'm concerned. Being an actor, I have reptilian skin, so I'm built for it, but I really have to applaud Super Rare for being so brave, for being able to say, yeah, we see the value in this. We understand the conversation that you're trying to raise, and we see how this can help solve racial problems. And so I applaud them. The format and the drop mechanics is at this point 1 a week. They are a 1 of 1. Anyone who owns the NFT, I'm also transferring all the rights of my written poetry to that owner as well. So you'll own the IP of the written word in perpetuity, and you can repurpose, resell, publish as you wish without my permission on a non-exclusive basis, because I'll be the only other owner. And so as well as receiving a 13-inch luxury art book that will be 24 pages, that's full color, full gloss of the entire Minstrel series, but also will be a little bit of an anthology of the history of the Minstrel show. and what it has meant for the Black diaspora and what it's meant for entertainment. So that will be signed by myself and the photographer, Isaac Alvarez. If anyone acquires 5, I will then airdrop them a never released one of one. So those are basically the drop mechanics. I'm releasing them once a week. I just minted the 3rd one right before this conversation. So it's up now, and it's called Not Interested. And that's also a very, very strong piece. And I invite everyone to please take a look at it. So far, the first 2 have been acquired through reserve and auction, and they've both sold successfully for 3.3 Ethereum each. So the floor for one of these projects is 3.3. And so now currently the reserve price on Not Interested is 3 Ethereum, and that's the current reserve price. So it's there, and I'm going to continue to mint one a week. And, knock on wood, the drop remains successful. And I think that there are some very sophisticated collectors that are willing to look beyond the lower level arguments to see the highbrow value of the art.
I think so too. And, major congratulations on those sales. Those aren't, insignificant at all. The big time congratulations on both of those. And I'm happy to hear that Super Air and you have a good relationship. Can't say I'm surprised that they, were thoughtful enough to see the value in this, because it does seem to me that it's a very, very strong platform. After this drop or this project concludes, do you see yourself continuing in NFTs? I'd imagine so, considering, how much value you see in it. And if so, do you have any ideas on where you could take it? And also, do you have ideas of where similar creatives like you, filmmakers, actors, how NFTs will, I was going to say might, but really the reality is how NFTs will infiltrate their work and become kind of normalized within those mediums as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a first question is yes. Well, listen, I also look at this as an artist too, right? When we think about an NFT, right, a non-fungible token, why do you fucking buy an NFT? An NFT is it's an asset, right? It's an asset, right? So why do you buy an asset? You buy an asset because of its intrinsic value or its perceived value, right? Its perceived potentiality. So I make the public statement that not only am I here as an artist, I'm here to stay. Part of that is obviously paying homage to myself and my art, but also paying homage to the collectors that have collected my art thus far. My last NFT drop was a piece of Spinema, an entire film, and then I did limited edition assets. All those limited edition assets sold out in 22 hours. And so the one of one sold. So there are a lot of collectors that have supported my work. And I want to make the public statement that I am here to stay, and that I am going to continue to rise, and I am going to continue to create sophisticated work that is designed to change the world in the conversation, that is designed to put money in the hands of the boots that can actually change the world. I'm not here for a cash grab. I'm here to create sophisticated work that can elevate the conversation and evoke real impact. And so for me, that's the most important thing. As it relates to my next ideas, I'm already developing my next drop, which is going to be a Spinema drop. And that's going to be a full 5.5 minute film. And that's called, that's a piece called Break the Bars, which is focused on inner city children and how as children, when we grow up, we see razor wire, barbed wired fences, and we see bars on our windows as opposed to green grass and open fields, and what that does to the psyche of inner city children. And so that's going to be the next Spinema, full-on Spinema drop. And so be ready for that. So I'm going to be doing a couple of things concurrently to continue to create value and increase the value and increase the floor of David Bianchi's work. Long term, I believe, and I don't know, and look, I'm not a dev, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I do believe that the future of NFTs, from a high collector perspective, is motion. I do believe that it's long form. I think that you're starting to see a trend even from people that are working in Cinema 4D, where they're sort of creating atmospheric, ambient, sort of like really big, epic landscape sort of pieces that are complex in their movements. 35 seconds, a minute 30. I even saw a piece that was like 2.5 minutes long on Maker's Place that was like 267 megabytes. I was like, and so, if you're a collector and you're like, well, here's a great standalone piece, and then here's this other piece that is just has breadth in its scope. I would imagine that as a collector, you would go where you would perceive there would be more work, more craft, more value, more technical acumen as it relates to the work. So I think that long form is probably going to be where NFT art is eventually going to go. As it relates to film and television, it's absolutely already here, right? You know, Marvel, Screen Gems, you know, all these big boys, Warner Brothers, all these studios are already thinking about showing up. So us as early adopters, we get to do what we do. And then eventually Goliath is going to come stomping around and we're just going to swim in the waves, you know? But I think that NFTs are going to work in every function of life, not just in art. I mean, One Of, for example, is a platform being dropped by Quincy Jones, and that's going to be all completely music driven, you know, and that's going to be on the Tezos blockchain. You know, you're going to have like the DMV, for example, is probably going to use NFTs to authenticate VIN numbers and authenticate, you know, driver records, etc. You know, Gucci is already doing things with merchandising. Levi has already done drops with merchandising. I think, and I believe that NFTs are going to be the future of everything, not just intellectual property as it relates to the arts, but just in terms of like human tracking and data tracking. So I am here to stay, and I really I think that that people believe that.
For sure. And it's, you know, it's interesting to see that art kind of broke through into the mainstream, you know, almost first with NFTs. Then now we're kind of seeing collectibles, photography starting to come in. So that's like an extension of art. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, you know, blockchain is going to disrupt everything. It's basically Internet 2.0. And when you think about how much the internet disrupted, you can kind of apply the same thing. You know, you mentioned all these different, you know, accounting and data tracking, of course, right? So, you know, definitely a lot to think about there when it comes to the entertainment industry. One thing I really appreciate is that you also give ownership of the intellectual property to your buyers. What do you think that can mean long term, right? Because when I first found out about that at first, I was like, okay, but why is that important? But then as I saw more and more projects doing it and I saw the application, I had a moment that was like, and I was like, of course it's important. It's incredible. So I'd be curious to see if you could speculate on what these spinema pieces or the spoken word poetry, you know, giving the intellectual property, what that could mean long term.
Well, I think that it's something that I thought just as it relates to the modern day minstrel. And so just so everybody knows, you know, the owners of my Spinema films, they own the NFT, but they don't own the intellectual property to that written word or the intellectual property to that film, unless as an artist and a creator, you otherwise specify that in some sort of real world contract that could be attached to an IPFS. Eventually you'll be able to do it in the smart contract. So what I chose to do with the modern day minstrel was I wanted to give the owner of the NFT, not just the NFT, I wanted them to have a piece of me. I wanted them to feel like they were getting more than just the meta, that they were not only just getting physical, they were also getting emotional, spiritual, because these words are intangible unless they're on a piece of paper, but the feelings you can't deny that comes behind the words. And if someone chose to publish these words, then I would be honored that they would choose to do that. If they chose to resell these words, I would be honored if they would choose to do that. So for me, it was just basically a vote of confidence and sort of an olive branch of thank you. I think that being able to offer intellectual property to collectors, I think adds value to an NFT. I think that if we believe that David Bianchi is here to stay on July 14th, 2021, what will David Bianchi's work be worth on July 14th, 2023? And at the speed of the meta, who knows? And the IP of that poetry could really have some real value someday. And so for me, it was just an additional way to just honor people that are spending their hard-earned Ethereum. And I say that with real conscience, because even if you bought Ethereum at $20, think about all the nights that you lost sleep that you held, you just held. Like, that's work. I mean, when Bitcoin dipped, I lost a lot of sleep. And it was, you know, thankfully it was my girlfriend. She talked me off the ledge. I almost sold because I was terrified, you know? And so there's something to be said about that. So I think that, but I also believe that intellectual property transfer, it just adds a bonus to a token, right? And also the physical adds a bonus to a token. We're really not quite at this full meta experience where there are some collectors that are peripheral collectors that would like to have physical tokens. Some collectors just don't give a damn. Some collectors are completely anonymous and don't even have Twitter accounts. Some collectors want to have a physical book on their table. Some collectors want to have some sort of physical token. So I'd like to offer that if that does indeed interest a collector. And IP, I think, is really important. It just gives you more ownership of what it is that you're acquiring. And eventually, smart contracts will be able to do that for us, where you won't have to have a real world contract. So for purposes of the modern day minstrel, with my attorneys, I drafted a real world contract that has all the terms and conditions associated to the transfer of the IP rights to the poetry. And then I just put that in Pinata. And then whoever owns the NFT, I send the IPFS so that they have the terms and conditions. And if they want to use it, great. If they don't, then great. But it's also part of just sticking to my word. You know, it's like when you buy an ape, I can take that ape and I can make a t-shirt, right? You own the ape, you own the ape. And that's amazing.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's so cool that you're just looking for more opportunity to give your collectors value. I imagine as this space, develops, like as the technology continues to catch up and, new kind of drop mechanisms or new just smart contract mechanisms get implemented, I can't wait to see what your future work features, because I'm assuming you'll take full advantage of it. At least that's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
So, the modern day minstrel project on Super Rare, Part 3 just dropped today. There's 2 more parts dropping, correct?
There's going to be a total of 10. There's going to be a
total of 10. Okay.
A total of 10. Total of 10. The story, and if you look at if you remember the images, he by the end of the story completely starts to lose his sense of identity. So if you look at these 2 images here, the one to the right where I'm screaming, right? That's a piece called Rage. And that piece called Rage is rage, the destruction of my identity. I have nothing left, I feel. Rage, beat me, shame me, nigga name me, I feel. Rage, hundreds of years of ancestral pain, guttural screams from you, profiting from our shame. Have you no shame? Rage. So it gets to that point because he loses himself and his identity, and he's trying to break free of all these heavy stereotypical mechanisms that have been his spiritual and emotional binds. And if you look at the last image to the left, that's called recognition, where in life, oftentimes we get beaten to the point of submission that we suddenly are free to become something new. When you get granted the gift of desperation, G-O-D, the gift of desperation, where you have nothing left, that is the window for being able to redefine yourself. And that's what has happened to this man in this journey. And if you'll notice on the last image, the black face is gone. And in the previous images, you see me gagging on the watermelon, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to free himself of the binds and remove himself and consume the things that have been the demons of him. So even when we're shooting this thing, it's not just a series, it's a full-on performance. The image here to the left, you see that that reminds me of the late 70s when it was taboo in the public eye big time for people of color to date white women. And his idea is that the idea of dating a white woman would be able to solve his lack of identity, hence her fingers smearing the blackface off. So there are all these hidden metaphors within the work. So eventually we'll get to that point of emotional destruction and the series will end.
Well, yeah, I mean, incredibly powerful. So, third one dropped today, 6 more to come. If someone collects 5, then they get a unique one of one. Yep. Any other Easter eggs for the project or just anything else people should keep in mind?
No, I mean, just to recap on the mechanics that, if you acquire an NFT, you'll own the intellectual property of the poetry. And and I'll be anyone who does acquire 5. If there is someone that acquires 5, I will airdrop a limited edition, never been released, one of one. And I think that if the drop continues to go well, maybe I will mint, one that will be all 10. And sort of do like, kind of almost like what people did with his everydays, but sort of like encompass everything in one. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. This project is again about raising awareness. And also, so everybody knows, I'm donating a portion of these proceeds to nonprofits that are furthering Black voices in film and television, to diversity programs, because that's important to me, to be able to continue to use NFTs for philanthropy and use NFTs for social change.
And that's in line with your first NFT project. So I'm sure, people will continue to pay attention for that moving forward. And obviously it's an incredible cause. So where else can people find David? You got TV shows. What other work's going on right now? Where can we find you?
Sure, man. I'm pretty accessible, man. I mean, obviously, I'm on Twitter at David Bianchi, Instagram David Bianchi official. Those are probably the easiest ways to find me. I'm actually in the Discord now.
Oh yeah.
I've joined the party. And listen, man, I really just love. I love the NFT community. Even how you and I connected. It's just like. It's just so warm, and it's just so comforting, and it's just a place for anybody to be able to find themselves artistically. And I invite anybody that's out there that if you're on the periphery, like I always say, just attack the island and burn the boat. Like, just do it. Just come into this community, be an early adopter, look at some of the crypto OGs. I look at guys like Osinachi, who I've become friendly with, and he supports my work. And that guy's he's just crypto OG, and I look at guys like that, and I'm just happy that, he was able to pave a way for me. And I want to be able to pave a way for other folks that can come behind me so I could inspire people and create an opportunity for people to say, wow, I see what David's doing. I can do this too.
Awesome, David. Well, everyone, look out for all of David's future work, but you have an opportunity to get your hands on this Minstrel project right now on Super Rare. 3rd edition just dropped before this. Make sure you follow him on Instagram. We'll put all the links in the description. David, thank you so much, man. This was a pleasure.
The pleasure's been all mine. Yeah, and if you're on TV, Queen of the South, SEAL Team Season 4, and I'm around. But I'm just grateful for this opportunity and this conversation. I look forward to more. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.